So everything you learned in elementary school about 1492 is, well, it's basically a lie.
Oh, entirely, yeah.
Right. Like, think back to those classroom dioramas and, the little rhymes about sailing the ocean blue.
Right, the whole heroic visionary narrative.
Exactly.
Hmm.
The story we all kind of absorbed was that Christopher Columbus was this lone, misunderstood genius.
Yeah, fighting against a world of flat earthers.
Yeah. Like, he supposedly stood up to a world entirely populated by superstitious people and bravely sailed out to prove the Earth was round. But when you actually look at the historical documents,
It's a completely different story.
it is vastly different. Columbus did not set out to prove the Earth was round. Like, every educated person on the planet already knew it was a sphere.
They'd known for centuries.
Exactly. Instead, as we're going to unpack today, the discovery of the New World was actually the result of one of the most spectacularly botched math equations in human history.
It really is. That elementary school narrative is incredibly resilient, but it just completely papers over the bizarre, chaotic reality at the time.
Yeah, it cleans it up too much.
Way too much. The standard story gives us this clean trajectory of scientific triumph, but the actual history gives us a portrait of a man driven by staggering mathematical confirmation bias.
An incredibly desperate geopolitics.
Right, and an almost delusional reliance on ancient texts. We are looking at a voyage that was essentially built on a foundation of massive errors.
Which is exactly why we are so thrilled you're joining us for this installment of our Ancient Archive Blueprint series on decoding pillars of ancient history. Today's deep dive is titled, What Columbus Got Wrong While Traveling.
It's a fitting title, honestly.
It really is, and our mission for you in this conversation is to completely unpack the real motivations behind that famous 1492 voyage.
We need to look at the why.
Right, the why. And we're going to discover exactly where Columbus got his deeply flawed maps and explore how monumentally, like almost unbelievably wrong he was for using them.
Because the source material doesn't show us a genius.
No, not at all. It shows us an incredibly stubborn navigator who accidentally stumbled into history simply because he absolutely refused to check his unit conversions.
I mean, to truly understand how a mistake of that magnitude alters the trajectory of global history, we have to pull back the lens. You can't just analyze this accident in a vacuum.
Right, it didn't just happen out of nowhere.
No, making sense of it requires synthesizing hundreds of years of ancient Greek mathematics, medieval Islamic cartography, and even the maritime mechanics of Norse history.
We have to look at the whole interconnected puzzle that shaped the 15th century worldview.
Exactly. And the best place to start that puzzle is by looking at the intense pressure of the era.
Yeah, because before we can even begin to understand how Columbus managed to get his maps and his math so incredibly wrong, we really have to understand why he was so desperate to sail west into the open ocean in the first place.
Right. You don't pitch a suicide mission unless there's a massive geopolitical pressure cooker forcing your hand.
And the Iberian Peninsula in the late 15th century is, it's the ultimate pressure cooker. You have two neighboring kingdoms, Spain and Portugal, and they are locked in this high-stakes, zero-sum rivalry for global wealth.
To understand the why of 1492, you have to look at the global supply chain of the era. Europe was absolutely desperate for the commodities of the East.
Specifically spices, right?
Yes, the incredibly lucrative spices, silks, and precious metals coming from the Indian subcontinent and the Spice Islands.
And the traditional overland routes for those goods were effectively choked off or heavily taxed by other empires, which made those commodities astronomically expensive by the time they actually reached the markets in Europe.
Right, the markup was staggering. A handful of peppercorns could basically buy a minor estate.
Which is wild to think about now.
It is, but that economic reality meant whichever European nation could figure out a direct maritime route to those Asian markets would essentially control the wealth of the world.
And at this specific moment in history, Portugal was winning that race by a landslide.
Oh, completely. Under the sponsorship of Prince Henry the Navigator, the Portuguese had been systematically mapping and pushing down the western coast of Africa for decades.
They were playing a very long, methodical game. They weren't just guessing.
No, they were building an empire point by point down the African coastline. And by 1488, they achieved a breakthrough that essentially locked the global market.
Right, a Portuguese explorer named Bartolomeu Dias.
Yes, Diaz successfully rounded the Cape of Good Hope at the absolute southern tip of Africa, and that proved definitively that you could sail around the African continent to reach the Indian Ocean.
Which is a geopolitical earthquake. It proves the route was viable.
I mean, it was a brutally long and dangerous route, but it was real. And more importantly, Portugal immediately established a fierce, locked-down maritime monopoly over it.
Yeah, they had the outpost, they had the naval strength to protect it, and they had international treaties backing their claim.
Exactly. No other European power could legally or practically use that route without triggering a massive war with Portugal.
Which brings us to the other side of the Iberian border. Portugal is thriving, building this immensely lucrative maritime highway. Meanwhile, Spain is essentially exhausted.
They're completely drained.
Yeah, for like 700 years, the Christian kingdoms of the peninsula had been fighting the Reconquista, which was this relentless, grinding internal war aimed at expelling the Moors.
And the timing of the end of that war is absolutely critical here, because it wasn't until January of 1492.
Literally months before Columbus set sail.
Exactly. Literally months before that King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella finally conquered Granada, which was the absolute last Muslim stronghold in Spain. They finally achieved their centuries-long goal of a unified Catholic kingdom.
But then they open the royal vault to celebrate, and there is nothing inside. The treasury is completely depleted from generations of warfare.
Right. Think of Spain in 1492 as this massively ambitious, heavily armed, but totally cash-strapped startup.
I love that analogy. They're desperate to break into the global spice market. But this massive corporate monopoly, Portugal, is blocking the only known physical path to the suppliers.
Right, and Spain has to figure out a way to bypass that monopoly without violating international treaties.
The Spanish crown was in a state of acute financial desperation. They needed a shortcut to Asia, and they needed it immediately.
And it's into this exact atmosphere of imperial anxiety that a persistent, ambitious Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus steps forward with a really audacious pitch.
Right, he basically says, what if we ignore Africa entirely? What if we just sail due west across the open ocean to hit the eastern shores of Asia?
Now, when we talk about sailing west across the Atlantic, we really have to address a massive historical elephant in the room.
Yeah, the idea that Columbus was doing something completely unprecedented.
Right, the idea that he was stepping into this terrifying abyss that no European had ever braved is completely false. Columbus wasn't the first European to cross the Atlantic.
He was centuries late to that particular achievement.
Centuries! The narrative that the Atlantic Ocean was an unnavigable barrier until 1492 just completely ignores the highly sophisticated maritime cultures that preceded the Spanish voyages.
Like the Norse Vikings.
Exactly. Open ocean navigation across the North Atlantic had existed for hundreds of years.
The Vikings were pulling this off in the late 8th and early 9th centuries. And I was reading about how they did it, and it is fascinating because they didn't have anywhere near the technology Columbus had.
Not even close.
They were crossing the open ocean relying on things like sun compasses. So can you explain how a sun compass works? Because it sounds almost like magic when you consider they were navigating the frigid North Atlantic with it.
It does sound like magic, but the Norse sun compass is actually a brilliant piece of practical engineering. It's essentially a wooden disc with a central vertical pin, which is known as a gnomon.
Okay.
By carefully tracking the shadow cast by that pin over the course of a day, navigators could carve a specific curve into the wood, a gnomon curve. Once you have that curve established for a specific latitude, you can use the shadow on subsequent days to find true north. And you can do this even when the sun is partially obscured by the horizon.
Which is crucial in the high latitudes of the North Atlantic, where twilight lasts for these extended periods.
Exactly. Combine that shadow board with a deep generational understanding of ocean currents, the migration patterns of whales, and the flight paths of specific seabirds, and you have a system capable of extreme long-distance travel.
That's incredible. And by the late 10th and early 11th centuries, explorers like Leif Erikson are successfully navigating from the fjords of Greenland all the way to the eastern coast of North America.
Yes, they actually established a physical settlement at L'Anse Meadows in modern-day Newfoundland.
And the archaeological evidence there confirms an extensive Norse presence.
It does. But looking at the Viking precedent forces us to ask a really structural historical question.
Which is?
Why did the Norse voyages to North America eventually fade into obscurity, while Columbus's voyage fundamentally rewired the globe?
And the answer goes right back to that geopolitical pressure cooker we were talking about.
Exactly. The Vikings weren't looking for peppercorns and silk. They didn't have a king demanding a massive return on investment to fund a national treasury.
The Norse expansion was fundamentally driven by a search for basic resources, right? Like arable land for farming and timber for building.
Yes. There was no desperate, unified kingdom financing them to break a global spice monopoly. Once they reached Newfoundland, they found a really rugged environment, a cooling climate, and intense conflicts with the indigenous populations.
So the economic incentive simply wasn't strong enough to sustain a permanent transatlantic supply chain.
Right. The settlements were eventually abandoned, and the knowledge of those western lands retreated into the Norse sagas, largely isolated from the geopolitical maneuvering of southern Europe.
This naturally leads to the question of whether Columbus actually knew about those Viking voyages. Like, imagine if you're Columbus planning this grand westward expedition. Did he know there was a giant timber-filled landmass sitting exactly where he wanted to sail?
That remains one of the most vigorously debated topics among historians. We do know that early in his maritime career, long before he approached the Spanish monarchs, Columbus likely sailed on trading vessels to northern Europe.
Right, possibly traveling as far north as Iceland.
Yes. And if he did spend time in the Iceland ports, it is highly probable he heard the local oral histories and sagas detailing a vast landmass to the west.
But knowing Columbus's psychology, even if a sailor in Iceland sat him down and literally drew a map of Newfoundland, it probably wouldn't have altered his mission one bit.
No, not at all.
Because Columbus did not want to find a new continent. He wasn't looking for uncharted wilderness.
A new undeveloped continent was the absolute last thing he wanted to find.
Right.
His entire pitch, his entire identity was built on establishing a highly lucrative trade route with a vastly wealthy existing civilization. He wanted to sail into the opulent harbors of the East, present his credentials to the Grand Khan of Asia, and load his fleet with gold, silk, and spices.
So if someone had definitively proven to him that a wild, uncharted landmass was blocking his path to Asia, he would have viewed it as an enormous, frustrating obstacle, not a monumental discovery.
Exactly. He had absolute tunnel vision for the Spice Islands.
So Spain is desperate for a route to Asia. Columbus pitches this westward ocean crossing. But to actually justify this to the Spanish monarchs and their venture capitalists, he has to prove the journey is physically survivable.
Right.
And this is where we arrive at the most staggering part of the story. To make his pitch work on paper, Columbus had to actively suppress and ignore the established scientific reality of his own era.
This is the monumental mathematical blunder that defines his entire endeavor. The pitch required him to manipulate the very dimensions of the planet.
We really have to dismantle the biggest piece of fictional history right here, the myth of the flat Earth.
Oh, yes, please.
It was essentially invented by 19th century writers trying to make Columbus look like a rebel fighting against medieval ignorance. But in 1492, every royal mathematician, every seasoned ship captain, every educated person from the Islamic world to the Christian courts knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the Earth was a sphere.
That geometric reality had been firmly established for thousands of years. The debate was never about the shape of the planet.
The fierce debate in the 15th century was entirely about the planet's circumference.
Yes. And to fully grasp the sheer scale of the math error Columbus made, we have to travel back in time, long before the 15th century. We have to look at the gold standard of ancient Greek mathematics.
Specifically, the work of Eratosthenes.
Yes, in the 3rd century BCE, what Eratosthenes accomplished is one of the most elegant, breathtaking demonstrations of human intellect in recorded history.
He managed to calculate the circumference of the Earth with astonishing precision, using nothing but shadows and deductive reasoning.
It really is wild.
Break down the geometry of how Eratosthenes actually did this. Because we're talking about a guy in ancient Egypt calculating the size of the globe using a wooden stick, while modern scientists need lasers and orbital satellites to do the same thing.
It's brilliant. So Eratosthenes was serving as the chief librarian at the Great Library of Alexandria. He had access to a vast network of geographic reports, and one specific detail caught his attention.
Okay, what was it?
He read a report stating that in the southern city of Syene, which corresponds to modern-day Aswan, on the exact day of the summer solstice at local noon, the sun shone directly down to the bottom of a deep vertical well.
Wait, so that means the sun is sitting at the absolute zenith. It is directly overhead, perfectly perpendicular to the ground, casting absolutely no shadow whatsoever.
Exactly perpendicular, no shadow at all. Now, Eratosthenes knew that on that exact same day, at that exact same time, in the city of Alexandria, which was located hundreds of miles to the north, the situation was fundamentally different. If you planted a perfectly vertical stick of gnomon in the ground in Alexandria at noon on the solstice, it did cast a shadow.
So the sun rays are hitting Syene dead straight, but they're hitting Alexandria at an angle.
Because the sun is so incredibly far away, Eratosthenes correctly assumed that the sun's rays arrive at Earth perfectly parallel to one another.
Okay.
If the Earth were flat, a vertical stick in Syene and a vertical stick in Alexandria would both cast identical shadows, or no shadows at all, because the parallel rays would hit the flat surface at the same angle everywhere.
Right, that makes perfect sense.
The fact that the shadows were different was undeniable proof of the Earth's curvature.
But he didn't just stop at proving the curve. He actually used that shadow to measure the entire planet.
This is where the pure geometry comes in. Eratosthenes meticulously measured the angle of the shadow cast by the stick in Alexandria. He determined that the angle of the sun's rays relative to the vertical stick was roughly 7.2 degrees.
Which, if you divide a full 360-degree circle by 7.2, you get exactly 50. So 7.2 degrees is 1/50th of a circle.
Following the principles of alternating interior angles, Eratosthenes realized that if the angle of the shadow is 1/50th of a circle, then the arc of the Earth's surface between the city of Alexandria and the city of Syene must also represent exactly 1/50th of the planet's total circumference.
Wow. So all he needed at that point was the physical distance between the two cities on the ground. And obviously he couldn't exactly look it up on a GPS.
No smartphones back then.
I read that the distances were often calculated by professional pacers, called beimatists, whose entire job was to walk with a perfectly uniform stride to measure the distance between outposts.
That's exactly right. And the prevailing measurement of the distance between Alexandria and Syene was 5,000 stadia.
Okay.
Eratosthenes simply took that distance, multiplied it by 50, and arrived at a total planetary circumference of 250,000 stadia.
And what is that in modern measurements?
Depending on the exact conversion rate of the ancient stadium used, that translates to roughly 25,000 miles.
And when modern geodesists measure the Earth today using satellites, the actual equatorial circumference is 24,901 miles.
Yes.
A guy in the 3rd century BCE looking at shadows in a well and hiring people to walk across the desert got within a fraction of a percent of the actual physical size of the planet.
It's staggering. And that calculation was the gold standard of geographic knowledge. The intellectual elites of the 15th century, including the advisors to the Spanish crown, were well aware of Eratosthenes' math. The consensus was that the Earth was roughly 25,000 miles around.
But Columbus had a massive problem with that number. Because if Eratosthenes was right, Columbus's business proposal was physically impossible.
Completely impossible.
If the Earth is 25,000 miles around and you account for the known size of Europe and Asia, the ocean separating the west coast of Europe from the east coast of Asia would be roughly 12,000 miles wide.
And the logistics of a 12,000-mile open ocean voyage were completely beyond the capabilities of 15th century maritime technology.
Right, because of supplies.
Yes, a caravel of that era simply could not carry enough fresh water and food provisions to sustain a crew for the months it would take to cross 12,000 miles of unbroken water.
If they attempted it, the entire crew would succumb to scurvy, dehydration, and starvation long before they ever sighted land. The royal mathematicians knew this. Columbus knew this.
So, faced with the flawless, undeniable math of Eratosthenes, what does Columbus do?
He decides he just doesn't like those numbers. He actively searches for an alternative set of facts that supports his business model.
He dismisses the gold standard entirely and turns his attention to a different ancient source. He chooses to anchor his theories on the writings of Claudius Ptolemy.
Right, a highly influential Greco-Roman astronomer and geographer who lived in the 2nd century CE, which is about 400 years after Eratosthenes.
And Ptolemy had a drastically different conception of the globe.
He did.
Ptolemy made a critical error in his calculations, leading him to severely underestimate the overall circumference of the globe. But even more vitally for Columbus's purposes, Ptolemy vastly overestimated the eastward stretch of the Eurasian landmass.
Okay, so Ptolemy's geography argued that Europe and Asia stretch much further across the globe's surface area than they actually do.
Yes.
And if the landmass is incredibly wide, that means the ocean filling the gap on the other side must be incredibly narrow. Ptolemy shrinks the ocean.
Exactly. But Columbus wasn't satisfied just using Ptolemy's errors. He decided to compound them with what has to be one of the most catastrophic, world-altering unit conversion failures in history.
Yes, the unit conversion failure. This is the linchpin of Columbus's entire delusion. To calculate the distance of a single degree of longitude, Columbus relied on the meticulous work of a 9th century Persian astronomer named Al-Farghani.
Right.
Let's focus on this because it is the ultimate planetary scale equivalent of mixing up miles and kilometers on a road trip.
It really is.
Like, imagine you are driving and your GPS says your destination is 60 units away. If you assume it means kilometers, you figure you'll be there in 45 minutes. But if it actually meant miles, you're going to be driving for over an hour. Columbus did the exact reverse of that, but applied it to the entire circumference of the planet.
The mechanics of the error are just fascinating. Al-Farghani was a brilliant astronomer operating within the Islamic Golden Age. He had actually calculated the length of a degree of longitude with exceptional accuracy.
Oh?
But because he was working within the scientific framework of the Islamic world, his calculation was expressed in a specific unit of measurement, the Arabic mile.
And the Arabic mile is a significantly longer unit of physical distance than the unit Columbus was used to.
Exactly. The Arabic mile measures roughly 1.9 to 2 kilometers. But Columbus, studying these texts centuries later in Europe, saw Al-Farghani's calculation and mistakenly, or perhaps willfully assumed, that the Persian astronomer was using the much shorter standard Roman mile.
Which is how long?
The Roman mile measures roughly 1.48 kilometers.
Wow. So he takes an accurate number, strips away the correct unit, and applies a much smaller unit to it.
By assuming Al-Farghani was talking about Roman miles, Columbus artificially shrunk the physical length of every single degree of longitude on the planet.
So when you combine Ptolemy's overly stretched Eurasian continent with Columbus's botched unit conversion of Al-Farghani's numbers, what is the final disastrous mathematical result?
The mathematical confirmation bias compounds upon itself. Columbus effectively shrunk the total circumference of the Earth by a staggering 25%.
He erased a quarter of the planet from his calculations.
He did.
He shrinks the globe, stretches out Asia, and convinces himself that the ocean separating them is barely a pond. He genuinely believed that the eastern coast of Japan was only about 3,000 miles from the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa.
And a 3,000-mile voyage was entirely feasible. A 15th century fleet could easily carry enough provisions to survive a 3,000-mile crossing.
Right. But the physical reality, governed by Eratosthenes' accurate math, was 12,000 miles.
Yes. If he hadn't made that specific unit conversion error, if he had actually trusted the facts, his entire proposal would have been mathematically impossible even to himself. He never would have left the dock.
But he did make the error. He had mathematically cornered himself into believing the Earth was 25% smaller. And that created a massive new problem for him, didn't it?
Oh, a huge problem. Because no standard, credible navigational map in Europe supported his shrunken globe pitch.
If you were going to walk into the royal court of Spain and ask the monarchs to fund a fleet, you can't just hand them a notebook full of scribbled contradictory math. You need visual proof.
You need a map. And he had to go find cartographers who were just as attached from reality as he was.
Which brings us to the flawed maps and the incredible depth of his confirmation bias. Columbus essentially goes shopping for a reality that fits his delusion. Where did he find a map that backed up this terrible math?
He found an echo chamber in the form of a Florentine astronomer and mathematician named Paolo dal Pozzo Toscanelli.
Toscanelli. What was his involvement in this geographic fantasy?
Toscanelli was a respected intellectual, but he shared Columbus's intense optimism regarding a westward route to Asia. In 1474, years before Columbus ever secured funding, Toscanelli sent Columbus a detailed letter and, crucially, a map.
And this map.
This map was a visual representation of the exact mathematical errors we just discussed. It depicted a radically shrunken Atlantic Ocean, explicitly supporting the theory that a westward route to the Spice Islands was a quick, viable journey.
It's the ultimate confirmation bias. Toscanelli hands him a beautiful, authoritative-looking piece of parchment that basically says, yes, your completely wrong math looks absolutely perfect on paper.
Columbus latched onto Toscanelli's map as unassailable proof, but his obsession didn't stop with maps. He fed his delusion constantly by meticulously studying specific theoretical texts.
Right. He treated two books in particular as absolute geographic gospel. Pierre Daly's astronomical treatise Imago Mundi and the famous travels of Marco Polo.
We have to talk about how he interacted with these books because it reveals so much about his psychology. You can actually go to museums today and see Columbus's personal surviving copies of these texts.
And they aren't just sitting pristine on a shelf.
No, they are heavily, obsessively annotated in his own handwriting.
The marginalia in Columbus's copy of Imago Mundi is a window into his desperate need for validation. Right?
Completely. Anytime Pierre Daly mentioned a classical source suggesting the ocean was narrow or the landmass of Asia was immense, Columbus would underline it, highlight it, and write extensive notes in the margins. He completely ignored any passages that suggested the Earth was larger.
He did the exact same thing with Marco Polo. He treated a Venetian merchant's travel diary, which was already filled with wild exaggerations about the immense wealth and sheer size of the Eastern empires, as a rigorous cartographic document.
To Columbus, these ancient treatises and theoretical maps produced by astronomers in landlocked libraries were the ultimate authority.
But we have to contrast his academic obsession with the actual maritime reality of the 15th century. Because the working sailors, the merchants, and the captains who are actually successfully navigating the oceans every single day were not relying on theoretical treatises or the musings of Marco Polo.
Definitely not. They were using a completely different, highly sophisticated system of mapping.
If you were a professional navigator in the Mediterranean or exploring the African coast, the absolute gold standard was something called a portolan chart.
Yes.
And if you look at a portolan chart, it looks almost alien compared to the maps we use today. There's no grid of latitude and longitude lines.
Portolan charts didn't rely on latitude and longitude because they were designed for the immediate, practical reality of getting a ship from one specific port to another.
Right.
They are instantly recognizable by their distinct visual style. They are covered in complex, intersecting webs of straight lines radiating outward from beautifully illustrated circular compass roses.
These lines are called rum lines. But how do you actually use a web of lines to sail a ship? Explain the mechanics of navigating with a portolan chart.
It's an intensely practical geometric system. A navigator would lay the portolan chart flat on a table. They would locate their starting port and their desired destination port.
Okay.
Then, using a straight edge, they would find the specific rum line that connected those 2 points. That rum line corresponded directly to a specific constant compass bearing.
So the map literally gives you the exact heading you need to steer. You line up the straight edge, see that the line points say southwest by south. You tell the helmsman to lock the ship's compass to southwest by south, and you just sail in a straight line until you hit your destination.
Precisely. It was a system built entirely on constant bearings. And these charts were not dreamed up by astronomers in a library. Portolan charts were collaborative masterpieces of empirical data. They were continuously built and refined over generations by Portuguese cartographers and Genoese merchants.
They combined the actual physical sailing logs of working captains with highly advanced geometry and cartographic techniques that had been preserved and refined by Islamic scholars during the Middle Ages.
Exactly. They were taking raw, tested data like, I sailed this direction for this many days and hit this rock, and plotting it onto incredibly accurate coastal maps. It's a perfect blend of hard empirical observation and advanced mathematics.
Because they were based on actual observation, portolan charts were the most reliable, accurate navigational tools on the planet at that time. They depicted the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean with startling precision.
Which begs a massive, glaring question.
Right. If Columbus was an experienced sailor, and the portolan charts are undeniably the absolute best, most empirically accurate maps of his era, why on earth would he actively ignore them when planning the most important voyage of his life?
Why push aside the hard data of working sailors to rely on Toscanelli's theoretical drawing and Marco Polo's exaggerated travel diary?
Well, because the portolan charts were rooted in objective reality.
And objective reality dictated that the Earth was roughly 25,000 miles around. The empirical data of the portolan tradition did not support the existence of a 3,000-mile shortcut to Japan.
An accurate map shattered Columbus's entire pitch.
Exactly. He had to deliberately reject the best scientific and navigational data of his day because it didn't tell him what he desperately wanted to hear.
It is the ultimate historical example of seeing only what you want to see. He engineers a reality where he can succeed.
Yes, he does.
Okay, so now the trap is set. Columbus has completely bungled his math via a unit conversion error. He has deliberately chosen a fantasy map over the accurate navigational tools of his peers.
Right.
He takes this package of terrible, fabricated information to the cash-strapped monarchs of Spain, and miraculously, they say yes. They give him the royal decree, they secure the funding, and they give him ships.
So now, the theoretical part is over. He actually has to do it.
He has to step onto a wooden deck and sail into an ocean that he mathematically misunderstood. How does a 15th century fleet manage to cross thousands of miles of open ocean, relying strictly on ancient technology?
The physical reality of navigating that voyage is terrifying when you understand the limitations of their tools. The instruments they used to pull off this crossing were not cutting-edge modern inventions. They were strictly ancient technologies being pushed to their absolute limits.
Let's walk through the actual tools of the Chiate. Imagine you are standing on the deck of the Santa Maria in 1492, staring out at an endless horizon. What is helping you figure out where you are? First up is the most obvious fundamental tool, right? The magnetic compass.
The magnetic compass was the absolute backbone of his entire navigational strategy, but it's important to recognize the deep history of the tool. The compass wasn't a European invention. The magnetic compass was originally developed in ancient China. Over centuries, the technology gradually diffused westward along the trade routes, eventually becoming an indispensable instrument for European maritime travel. It was the one tool that provided a constant, reliable sense of direction, regardless of whether the sky was completely clouded over or they were sailing in the dead of night.
Okay, the compass gives you your direction. It tells you which way the front of the ship is pointing. But direction alone isn't enough on the open ocean. You also need to know your physical location on the globe, specifically your latitude, how far north or south you are from the equator.
Right.
What did Columbus use to figure out his latitude?
He carried celestial navigation tools specifically designed to measure latitude, the astrolabe and the quadrant.
Both of which are incredibly ancient devices in their own right.
Very much so. The conceptual roots of the astrolabe trace back to ancient Greece, and the physical instrument was highly refined and perfected by brilliant Islamic astronomers and engineers during the Islamic Golden Age. The quadrant operates on very similar geometric principles. These were sophisticated analog computers.
Explain how a navigator actually uses an astrolabe to find their latitude. What is the physical action you have to take?
To find your latitude using an astrolabe, a navigator must measure the exact angle of a specific celestial body relative to the horizon. During the day, you would measure the angle of the sun precisely at local noon. At night, in the northern hemisphere, you would measure the angle of Polaris, the North Star.
Okay, so you find the star, then what?
You hold the heavy brass instrument by a ring at the top, allowing it to hang perfectly plumb. Then you rotate a sighting rule called an alidide until the star or the sun's rays pass perfectly through two tiny pinholes.
And once you have it perfectly lined up, you read the angle etched into the brass, consult an astronomical table, and calculate your latitude. On land, standing on a solid stone floor in an observatory, a skilled astronomer can use an astrolabe to get a spectacularly precise reading.
That is the crucial distinction on land. Let's think about the physical reality of doing this at sea. Imagine trying to use a delicate, precision celestial instrument that requires you to line up two tiny pinholes with a star and a perfectly level horizon.
Right.
But you are not standing on a stone floor. You are standing on the wooden deck of a 15th century caravel. The ship is violently pitching forward and backward, rolling side to side and heaving up and down in the middle of massy Atlantic Ocean swells.
It sounds physically impossible. I get seasick just looking at a boat gobbing in a harbor. I can't even imagine trying to hold a heavy brass disc perfectly plumb while the deck drops 10 feet every few seconds. The wind is howling and salt water is spraying in your face.
It was incredibly difficult, and as a result, it was notoriously inaccurate. The readings Columbus attempted to take from his quadrant and astrolabe while underway at sea were often wildly off the mark.
Just because he couldn't keep it steady?
Exactly. He simply could not keep the instrument steady enough to get a reliable angle relative to the true horizon. He would go through the elaborate process of taking a reading, doing the complex celestial math, and the resulting calculation would suggest he was hundreds of miles away from his actual physical location.
So if his celestial tools are too finicky and unreliable to trust on a rolling ocean, how is he actually keeping track of where he is? If he can't rely on the stars to pinpoint his location, how does he plot his progress across a 3,000-mile featureless expanse of water without getting hopelessly lost?
Because celestial navigation failed him at sea, Columbus was forced to rely on the most demanding, nerve-wracking, and error-prone navigational art ever devised.
Which is?
Dead reckoning.
Dead reckoning. The name itself sounds ominous. It sounds like you were just guessing and hoping you don't die.
It's not far off.
Break down the actual mechanics of dead reckoning for us. How exactly does a navigator calculate their position using this method?
dead reckoning is the process of calculating your current position by taking a previously known confirmed position, say the port you just left, and then constantly advancing that position mathematically based upon your recorded course, your elapsed time, and your estimated speed.
Okay, let's look at how they actually gathered those three pieces of data on the ship. First is the course, the direction. How did they keep a permanent record of which way the ship was pointing?
Direction was dictated by the magnetic compass. To record it, they used a very clever physical device called a traverse board. It was a wooden board, typically circular or shield-shaped, painted with a compass rose.
Right.
Radiating out from the center were lines of small holes, somewhat resembling a cribbage board. Every half hour, without fail, the helmsman or the pilot would insert a small wooden peg into the hole that corresponded to the exact compass heading the ship had been sailing for the past 30 minutes.
It's basically an analog data logger. At the end of a 4-hour watch, the pilot looks at the board and can see a physical representation of exactly how many half hours they spent sailing southwest and how many they spent sailing due west.
Exactly. So direction is locked down.
The second piece of data you need is time. How are they tracking the passage of time on a damp wooden ship in 1492? They didn't have waterproof chronometers or pocket watches.
They tracked time using the most ancient method available, sand. They relied on a half-hour glass, a fragile glass bulb filled with sand.
Okay, an hourglass.
A young ship's boy, known as a grommet, was assigned the incredibly tedious but vital task of watching that glass. The exact moment the very last grain of sand passed through the neck, he had to swiftly turn the glass over and loudly ring the ship's bell.
And that bell signaled the passage of a half hour.
Yes, prompting the helmsman to move the peg on the traverse board.
So they have direction mapped out on a wooden pegboard, and they have time measured by a teenager staring at falling sand.
Yeah.
The last piece of the dead reckoning equation is speed. This is the part that completely blows my mind. How on earth do you accurately measure how fast a wooden ship is moving through open water when you don't have a speedometer or any fixed landmarks to judge against?
The method they use to measure speed is perhaps the most primitive, unbelievable aspect of the entire voyage. To gauge their velocity, they would literally toss a piece of wood overboard near the front or bow of the ship.
A piece of floating garbage.
Literally a piece of flotsam or sometimes a specifically carved piece of wood called a log. A sailor would stand at the absolute front of the bow, toss the wood into the water, and then immediately begin counting a specific rhythm or reciting a rhythmic timed chant as he rapidly walked toward the back or stern of the ship.
Because he was watching how fast that floating piece of wood drifted past the hull of the vessel.
Right, because the wood is mostly stationary in the water and the ship is moving past it. Based entirely on how long it took the wood to travel the known length of the ship from the bow to the stern, the pilot would mentally calculate and estimate the ship's speed in miles per hour.
Let's just pause and absorb this reality.
It's a lot.
The monumental discovery of the New World, the event that permanently connected two hemispheres and kicked off the entire modern era of global trade and colonization, was physically facilitated by a guy doing mental math based on a floating piece of wood and an hourglass.
That is the stark reality of 15th century maritime technology. At the end of the day, Columbus would sit in his cabin and compile this incredibly fragile data.
Right.
He would take the accumulated compass headings from the traverse board, the total elapsed time recorded by the sand glass, and the estimated average speed derived from tossing wood into the water, and he would mathematically combine them.
He would say, based on my calculations, we sailed due west at an average of 4 miles an hour for 12 hours. Therefore, we are exactly 48 miles further west than we were this morning.
Exactly. He would mark a new dot on his chart, and that dot became his new starting position for the next day's calculations. He compounded that math day after day, week after week, across the Atlantic Ocean.
The margin for error is astronomical. It gives me anxiety just thinking about it, because dead reckoning is cumulative. If your speed estimate from the floating log is consistently off by just half a mile an hour, or if an ocean current is silently pushing the ship sideways while the compass says you are pointing straight, that error multiplies every single day.
And over a month of sailing, you could be hundreds of miles off course, completely lost in an endless ocean, and your map would still confidently tell you you were right on track.
And that precise realization, The staggering margin for error inherent in an unprecedented 12,000-mile dead reckoning voyage is exactly why every other monarch in Europe rejected Columbus's proposal.
Exactly.
Which leads us directly into the astonishing narrative of the voyage itself. We know the fundamentally flawed math, we know the confirmation bias of the maps, and we know the incredibly precarious reality of the ancient technology. Now let's explore how this highly misguided, mathematically doomed expedition actually unfolded in reality.
Because the true narrative is packed with details that completely subvert the sanitized history we are usually taught.
The reality of the voyage is a chaotic, dramatic mess. We've woven the source material into a detailed look at how this expedition played out, starting with the desperate hustle for funding and the sheer audacity of Columbus's demands. Because Spain was absolutely not his first choice.
No, Columbus spent nearly a decade aggressively pitching his westward voyage to various major European powers before he finally secured the backing of Ferdinand and Isabella.
Who did he pitch first?
He took his proposal to King John II of Portugal. He pitched the powerful maritime republics of Genoa and Venice. He even sent his brother to pitch the court of Henry VII in England.
And every single one of them said no. And it wasn't because they were backwards or thought the ships would sail off the edge of a flat Earth.
They rejected him because they were scientifically literate. The royal mathematicians and astronomical advisors at these courts reviewed Columbus's proposal, audited his map, and correctly realized that his calculations were entirely fabricated.
They knew the Earth was 25,000 miles around, they knew the ocean was 12,000 miles wide, and they knew his ships couldn't possibly carry the provisions to survive the crossing.
They essentially viewed his pitch as an expensive suicide mission and refused to underwrite it.
Which makes Spain's decision to finally fund it seem even more like a desperate last-ditch gamble. And we need to debunk a massive romantic myth about that funding right now. We've all heard the story that Queen Isabella was so deeply moved by Columbus's visionary genius that she dramatically pawned her own crown jewels to pay for the ships.
That is a complete fabrication invented much later to romanticize the Spanish crown's involvement. Isabella did not sell her jewelry.
Where did the money come from?
While the Spanish monarchs did provide their royal blessing, a set of administrative decrees, and some funds from the heavily depleted royal treasury, a very significant portion of the hard capital required to outfit the expedition actually came from a syndicate of private Italian bankers and investors based in Seville.
It was a calculated, high-risk venture capital investment, entirely driven by the potential for massive economic return, not a romantic pawning of jewels.
Speaking of the economics, let's talk about the contract Columbus signed, because the man possessed a staggering level of audacity.
Yes, the agreement he reached with the Spanish crown is known as the Capitulations of Santa Fe, and his demands were absolutely outrageous. Imagine a guy walking into a venture capital firm with a business plan based on flawed math and demanding this kind of compensation.
His demands were unprecedented. He didn't just ask for a salary or a flat finder's fee. He demanded that the Spanish crown officially grant him the aristocratic title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea, which would give him immense social standing. Furthermore, he demanded the viceroyalty of any and all lands he discovered. Being named viceroy meant he would be the supreme political governor, the literal voice of the king and queen in those territories.
Wow.
And perhaps most incredibly, he demanded a 10% cut of all revenues. Every ounce of gold, every sack of spices, every valuable commodity extracted from those lands in perpetuity.
He demanded a 10% cut of an entire unknown continent's wealth forever. That is wild, borderline delusional confidence for a guy whose entire theory rested on mixing up Arabic and Roman miles.
It really is.
But despite the massive demands, the actual physical fleet he was given was surprisingly modest.
The popular imagination often pictures a massive grand armada sailing into the unknown. The reality was a very small utilitarian fleet. There were only 3 ships, 2 nimble caravels, and 1 larger, slower cargo ship, the Santa Maria.
Across those 3 ships, the total crew consisted of roughly 90 men.
Just 90 men.
Just 90 guys cramming onto 3 wooden boats, trusting their lives to a guy doing math with a floating piece of garbage. And it's funny how historical memory works, because even the famous names of the ships are slightly misleading. The Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria.
The Santa Maria was its actual name, but the Nina and the Tinta were just colloquial nicknames. Sailors in the 15th century frequently referred to their ships by nicknames derived from the owners, the captains, or the ship's handling characteristics, rather than the official ecclesiastical names on the registry.
Like what?
For instance, the actual registered name of the Nina was the Santa Clara. But because the owner of the ship was a prominent local mariner named Juan Nino, the crew affectionately called the ship the Nina, which roughly translates to the girl, or simply Nino's ship.
That's fascinating. So this tiny fleet of 90 men departs from the Canary Islands in early September of 1492, leaving the known world behind. And here's where the story gets really tense. The actual transatlantic crossing, physically speaking, was surprisingly fast.
It was remarkably swift. Once they cleared the Canary Islands and headed due west, the entire crossing took only about 5 weeks.
5 weeks.
And this speed was not a testament to Columbus's navigational genius, but rather a stroke of immense blind luck. By sailing south to the Canaries before heading west, Columbus inadvertently positioned his fleet perfectly to catch the trade winds.
The powerful, consistent prevailing winds that blow steadily from east to west across that specific latitude of the Atlantic Ocean. The winds literally push them toward the Americas.
Exact.
5 weeks might sound like a breeze to a modern traveler, but we have to put ourselves in the psychological mindset of a 15th century sailor. These men had never been out of sight of a coastline for more than a few days in their entire lives.
Right, it was terrifying.
They're staring at an endless 360-degree horizon of water, completely reliant on Columbus's increasingly frantic, dead-reckoning calculations. The psychological terror of that isolation began to break them.
By October 10th, 1492, the tension on the ships reached a critical breaking point. They had been sailing with the wind at their backs for weeks.
And the crew started to realize something.
Yes. The terrified crew began to harbor a very rational fear. If these winds only blow steadily to the west, how will we ever be able to sail back to Spain?
Oh man, that's a chilling thought.
They genuinely believed they had sailed into a trap, pushing too far into an endless ocean, and were doomed to starve to death on the open water. The situation escalated into a near mutiny. The crew was actively threatening to throw Columbus overboard, seize control of the fleet, and attempt to turn the ships around.
They are ready to murder him to save their own lives.
Yeah.
But Columbus manages to talk them down from the ledge.
He was desperate. He pleaded with the crew, using every ounce of charisma and authority he had left. He struck a tense bargain. He begged them to give him just 3 more days of sailing west.
Just 3 days.
If they did not sight land within those 3 days, he swore he would capitulate, turn the fleet around, and try to fight the winds back to Europe.
Talk about cutting it unbelievably close. Because just 2 days later, in the early hours of October 12th, they finally spot land. But the specific details of how that happened are incredibly dark, and they reveal a deeply petty, ruthless side to Columbus's character.
It completely shatters the heroic image. Prior to the voyage, Queen Isabella, to incentivize the crew, had promised a substantial lifetime financial pension to the very first man in the fleet to visually confirm a sighting of land.
Right.
In the dark, early morning hours of October 12th, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana, who was pulling the grueling night watch in the rigging of the Pinta, yelled out. In the moonlight, he had spotted the white sand cliffs of an island in the Bahamas. He was unquestionably the first to see it.
He spots the new world, he wins the prize, but he doesn't get the money.
No, he doesn't. After the fact, when it came time to distribute the rewards, Columbus blatantly lied. He claimed that he had actually seen a faint, distant light flickering in the darkness late the previous evening, but he simply hadn't mentioned it to anyone at the time because it was so dim.
Are you kidding me?
Relying on his supreme authority as commander, Columbus claimed the lifetime royal pension entirely for himself.
It is stunningly greedy. The man has a contract guaranteeing him 10% of the entire wealth of the lands. He's the viceroy, the admiral, and he still goes out of his way to steal a working-class sailor's pension.
The betrayal was absolute. Rodrigo de Triana was reportedly so deeply disgusted and disillusioned by Columbus's greed that after returning to Spain, he abandoned the country, moved to North Africa, and supposedly converted to Islam, refusing to have anything more to do with the Spanish crown.
Let's move to the actual arrival, because the moment Columbus steps foot on land, his massive geographical delusion crashes headfirst into reality. And we should clarify something that often confuses people, especially in the United States. Columbus never actually set foot in North America.
That is a very common entrenched misconception. Over the course of his 4 voyages, Columbus extensively explored the Caribbean basin. He landed on the islands of the Bahamas, Cuba, and Hispaniola. He later mapped portions of the Central American coast and the northern coast of South America.
But at no point in his life did he ever land on or even see the territory that currently makes up the United States.
Never.
And when he did land in the Caribbean, his expectations were completely hilariously misaligned with reality. Because of his flawed math and his obsession with Marco Polo, he fully expected to be arriving on the outskirts of mainland Asia.
Yes.
And he packed for that specific reality. He brought a translator, expecting to talk to the Grand Khan.
Columbus was entirely anticipating an encounter with the highly sophisticated, incredibly wealthy Islamic traders and imperial courts of the East. To facilitate these vital trade negotiations, he brought along a man named Luis de Torres.
Who was he?
De Torres was a learned man who fluently spoke Arabic and Hebrew. Columbus intended for him to be the primary diplomatic envoy to the Asian rulers.
You can only imagine the profound mutual confusion when they waded ashore in the Bahamas and encountered the indigenous Taino people, a civilization that had absolutely zero linguistic, cultural, or geographical connection to the Arabic-speaking world of the Eastern Hemisphere.
Exactly. It must have been baffling for everyone involved.
But the terrifying power of confirmation bias is that it can warp reality to fit the theory. Instead of realizing his math was wrong, Columbus just doubled down. He spent months sailing around the coast of Cuba, absolutely convinced he was looking at the mainland of China.
He was completely captive to his flawed maps. As he explored the tropical coastline of Cuba, he constantly cross-referenced his surroundings with his heavily annotated copy of Marco Polo's travels.
So what did he do?
He would sail into a Caribbean harbor, look at the palm trees and indigenous canoes, and immediately convince himself, this perfectly matches Polo's description. This must be the great, wealthy port city of Zaytun. He violently twisted the physical reality unfolding in front of his eyes to validate his mathematical errors.
He simply refused to let go of the fantasy, and that stubbornness eventually leads to disaster. The end of that first voyage is marked by a massive failure. On Christmas Day, 1492, he loses his flagship.
The Santa Maria was a cumbersome cargo ship, unsuited for navigating the shallow, uncharted reefs of the Caribbean. On Christmas Day, the ship ran hard aground on a coral reef off the northern coast of Hispaniola.
And they couldn't save it.
Despite their frantic efforts, the hull was irreparably breached. The flagship of the expedition could not be saved. Columbus was forced to completely dismantle the wrecked vessel, salvaging the timbers and the cannons to build a crude, makeshift fortress on the shore, which he named La Navidad.
Because the Santa Maria was gone, there simply wasn't enough physical room on the two remaining, much smaller caravels to carry the entire crew back to Spain.
Exactly. He had to make a brutal logistical decision. He left 39 men behind at the La Navidad fort, armed with the salvaged weapons, while he sailed the Nina back to Europe to announce his success.
And what happened to the men he left behind?
When he returned on his second voyage a year later, the fort had been burned to the ground, and every single one of those 39 men was dead, having antagonized the local indigenous population.
It's a dark foreshadowing of the brutality that would follow. As Columbus launches his subsequent voyages, his mental state regarding geography and reality just continues to fracture. He becomes increasingly erratic.
Extremely erratic.
Look at his fourth voyage, where he gets stranded in Jamaica and essentially weaponizes an astronomical almanac to survive.
The Jamaica incident is a fascinating study in Columbus's cunning and desperation. During his final voyage, his ships were heavily damaged by shipworms, and he was forced to beach them on the coast of Jamaica. He and his crew were marooned there for over a year. Initially, the indigenous Arawak people provided them with food, but as the Spanish crew grew increasingly demanding and abusive, the Arawak rightly halted the food supply. Columbus knew his men were on the brink of starvation and mutiny.
So what does he do? He pulls out a book.
He consulted a German astronomical almanac he had brought with him, compiled by the astronomer Regiomontanus. Studying the tables, Columbus realized that a total lunar eclipse was mathematically scheduled to occur in just a few days.
He knows exactly what is going to happen in the sky, and he uses it to stage a divine intervention.
He called an urgent meeting with the Arawak leaders. He proclaimed that his Christian God was furiously angry with them for cutting off the food supply to his men. As a clear, undeniable sign of this divine wrath, Columbus warned that God was going to turn the moon blood red and completely erase it from the sky that very night.
That is just devious.
When the eclipse occurred exactly precisely as he predicted, casting a deep red shadow over the moon, the terrified Arawak immediately brought provisions to the ships and desperately begged Columbus to intervene with his God to restore the moon.
It is brilliantly manipulative and completely completely ruthless.
Yeah.
But while he retained that kind of cunning, his grasp on geographical reality was utterly collapsing.
That is gone.
By his third voyage, he reaches the northern coast of South America. He discovers the massive delta of the Orinoco River. And instead of realizing he has found a massive new continent, his mind goes somewhere completely mythological.
The volume of fresh water pouring out of the Orinoco River into the ocean was so immense, so incredibly powerful, that Columbus's geographical models completely broke down.
Because he couldn't explain it.
He deduced that such a massive flow of fresh water could not possibly originate from a normal earthly source. He convinced himself it must be flowing downward from a place of unimaginable height and pristine perfection. He explicitly documented in his journals and letters to the Spanish monarchs his genuine belief that he had navigated to the literal biblical Garden of Eden.
He thought he found paradise. He is totally, completely divorced from geographical reality. Which brings us to the final, most defining fact of his life. After 4 voyages, after navigating the Caribbean, surviving mutinies, and enslaving indigenous populations, Columbus died in complete, stubborn denial.
By the early 1500s, the intellectual landscape of Europe was rapidly shifting. Other navigators, most notably the Florentine explorer Amerigo Vespucci, were sailing down the coast of South America, meticulously recording celestial data, and realizing, based on undeniable empirical math and observation, that this landmass was far too massive to be Asia.
The rest of the world was catching on.
Vespucci recognized it was a completely new, previously unmapped continent. The entire European cartographic community was swiftly reaching a consensus. Columbus was wrong. He had not found the Indies.
But Columbus refused to accept it.
Until his dying breath in 1506, Columbus fiercely, aggressively insisted that the lands he had claimed were just the eastern fringes of the Asian continent. He died a wealthy man, holding his titles, but completely tragically in denial of the actual physical reality of what he had stumbled upon.
So we have to ask the big question. What does this all mean? How do we evaluate this legacy? Because we've just spent this entire deep dive completely tearing apart the sanitized myth. We've explored how Columbus ignored the flawless science of Eratosthenes, relied on a catastrophic unit conversion error, cherry-picked theoretical maps while ignoring empirical portoline charts, and navigated an ocean relying on a floating piece of garbage in a sand glass.
The legacy of Columbus's era is profoundly complex. The overarching theme we have to draw from the source material is that history is rarely, if ever, shaped by perfect science, flawless logic, or unblemished heroes.
Right.
Columbus achieved a feat that altered the biological and cultural trajectory of the planet. He initiated the permanent, irreversible connection of 2 hemispheres. But it is vital to understand that he didn't accomplish this because he was the smartest mathematician or the most visionary scientist of his era.
He accomplished it because he was the most aggressively stubborn man of his era.
Exactly that. He actively rejected the accurate, ancient calculations of the globe in favor of the deeply flawed geography of Ptolemy. He weaponized a math error to secure venture capital from a desperate Spanish crown, attempting to bypass a Portuguese monopoly.
Yeah.
He sailed into the unknown armed with ancient celestial tech that barely worked on a moving ship. And he found a new world entirely by accident, looking for peppercorns.
It proves that sometimes being monumentally catastrophically wrong can still violently reshape the world. It brings us right back to our starting point. History isn't a clean narrative. It is murky, it is messy, it is driven by ego and terrible math, and it is full of human error.
And very often, those profound human errors serve as the primary catalyst for the most significant tectonic shifts in human history.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought experiment to mull over on your own. We talked extensively about how Columbus confused the Arabic mile of Al Farghani with the much shorter Roman mile, artificially shrinking the globe by 25%. Imagine for a moment that he hadn't made that specific mistake.
Right, imagine he got it right.
Imagine he had accurately checked his unit conversions. He would have realized the ocean was 12,000 miles wide. He would have known his ships couldn't make it. No Italian investor, no Spanish monarch would have ever funded that suicide mission. Columbus never would have left the docks of Spain. What does it mean for our modern, highly interconnected world? The world of global trade, cultural exchange, and the immense tragic legacies of colonization? That the entire era of Western globalization was jump-started exclusively because one ambitious navigator adamantly refused to double-check his math homework.
It is a sobering, slightly terrifying reminder that the world as we know it, with all its complexities, is built entirely upon a foundation of profound mistakes.
Keep questioning those clean narratives. Until next time.
Ancient people were master engineers. Subscribe to Ancient Archive Blueprints as we explore more master designs from the past.